What's up guys, Apoxy here, and in today's video, I'll be going over the best PvP hunter builds for every subclass, meaning that I am providing you with my 5 different setups that I use all the time in the Crucible. Each of these builds have their own separate in-depth build videos, so if that interests you, I will be leaving all of these video links in the description. If you enjoy this video and want to see the same thing for Warlocks and Titans, make sure to leave a like and a comment, hit that subscribe button. Now, let's hop right in. Starting with the build that everyone believes is super free and crutch, we have my favorite one of all time, known as the John Cena build, aka Invis Void Hunter. This build gets a lot of hate due to it being too overpowered and easy to use, but to be honest, that's the whole point of builds, so who cares? This build allows you to constantly become invisible just by using your class ability, and as we all know, hunters have zero problem with getting their dodge ability back super quickly, so you will become an assassin in the Crucible and get a bunch of free kills and early jumps on people in gunfights. And on top of that, we have a lot of survivability built into this. The aspects you will want to use for this build are Vanishing Step for our invisibility anytime we dodge, and also Trapper's Ambush, which allows us to use smoke grenades to make ourselves and our allies invisible as well, making us a severe nuisance in the Crucible. Some great exotic armor pieces you can match up with this build to make it extra annoying. You could throw on War Musk Crown for instant health gain and shield every time we dodge. Another decent exotic is known as the Gemini Jesters, which is really good for close quarters maps because anytime we dodge near an enemy, we disorient them, and on top of being invisible, it makes us ensure our kills even more. But for Gemini Jesters, you really have to get up close and personal, so you definitely want to use something more like shotgun or some machine gun for this exotic. But that's all for the exotics. Moving on to the fragments that make this build even better. The first one we have is known as Echo of Persistence, which makes our invisibility last 50% longer, which can help us a lot in intense situations. Next we have Echo of Vigilance, which gives us an overshield anytime we defeat an enemy while our shields are gone, which is super useful because it allows us to have some extra health if we need to quickly jump into another fight. The third fragment is Echo of Remnants, which makes it so our lingering grenades have an increased duration. And lastly, we have Echo Bleaching, so that anytime we get a melee final blow, us and all of our allies around us will get health regeneration. So altogether, we have some amazing fragments that all work together super well to make this build super effective in PvP. The next build we are moving on to is for our solar hunters who love to put their weighted throwing knives to use in the Crucible. This build revolves around the exotic known as the Apoxy Embrace, which makes it so that our weighted throwing knives bounce twice and deal bonus damage. This build is definitely on the harder side due to having to be consistent with getting precision kills with the throwing knives, but with practice, it honestly isn't too bad, and also the tracking on them is sometimes ridiculous, meaning it can be pretty easy to be accurate with them. Starting with the aspects, the most important one is known as Knock 'em Down, which makes it so that anytime we are radiant and get a throwing knife kill, our weighted throwing knife will be refunded, meaning that we can really do some damage once we become more skilled with these knives. And I can't forget to mention that with this build, you basically have unlimited throwing knives with the use of Gambler's Dodge, because with this ability, anytime we dodge near an enemy, it fully recharges our melee ability, meaning we get our throwing knife back right away, and it's pretty overpowered. Then the other aspect is known as On Your Mark, which allows us to have increased handling and reload speed for every precision kill. Definitely some good aspects to have. Then moving on to our fragments, we actually get to pick 5 to use at once, which is great. The first one is known as Ember of Torches, which makes us radiant every time we get a kill with our throwing knives, meaning we will have another way to become radiant in our battles. Then add Ember of Tempering to give you and your allies increased recovery for every solar weapon final blow you get. So slap on your favorite solar weapon and go to town. Personally, my preference for solar weapons is the exotic known as Sunshot, just because of the explosive rounds and how nice it feels to shoot in PvP. And the third fragment is known as Ember of Singeing, which makes it so that anytime we switch a target, our dodge ability will recharge faster, which means we can become radiant more often. Then the next fragment is known as Ember of Benevolence and allows us to have an increased grenade, melee, and class ability energy anytime we apply radiance to an ally. So this fragment is definitely great for quality of life changes, and I definitely would suggest using it. And then for the fifth and final fragment you want to have on this build is Ember of Searing, which allows us to create fire sprites and grants us melee energy anytime we defeat a scorched target. So making sure to have a good grenade to scorch as many enemies as possible is key to obtaining a bunch of scorched stacks, so I'd recommend using a grenade that you feel most comfortable with to ensure that you don't waste them. Then lastly, of course, you pick between Blade Barrage or whichever golden gun you prefer, and you're ready to become a throwing knife demon. Next up, we have a build for all the cheeky Strand Hunters out there who want to make as many people mad as humanly possible in PvP. And how we're going to do that is by spawning a ton of Threadlings in the Crucible and just being a complete menace. I can't even lie, this build is super cheesy and I hate the ability spam meta as well, but who cares because Bungie wanted this to happen and they're allowing it. I also know that that a lot of Strand Hunters like to suspend people, but this build doesn't focus on that side of Strand at all. The first aspect we are using in the build is known as Widow Silk, which gives us the pleasure of having 2 grenade charges instead of 1, which means that we'll have 2 threading grenades to throw out and chase all of our enemies around. And if that wasn't enough, we also have another aspect known as Threaded Spectre. This aspect summons a Strand Decoy every time we use our dodge ability, and upon destroying it, it summons even more threadlings that distract and annoy our enemies. And on top of that, you have the exotic armor piece known as the 6 Coyote, and now we have 2 dodge charges, which is even more overpowered for us. If that's not enough for you, you can equip Gambler's dodge ability, so every time you activate it, you'll get your threaded spike back. And if you didn't know, threaded spikes are super free and easy damage. That's enough of the ability spam talk. Moving on to the fragments that top the build off, the first one we have is known as the Thread of Ascent, which makes it so that whenever we throw out our threading grenades, our weapon will automatically be reloaded. So the reason I chose this fragment is because it makes it so that we don't have to use our other melee dodge that reloads our weapon upon activation, and instead, we get both of the benefits at the same time, which is huge. Then next up, we have the Thread of Continuity, which just makes it so that our sever effects have an increased duration. And then for the third fragment, we have Thread of Evolution, which makes it so that our threadlings travel farther and deal additional damage. Now I'm just letting you know now, if we don't use this fragment, threadlings are almost useless and you will be seriously missing out on a lot of fun. And then for the fourth and final fragment, we have Thread of Generation, which just makes so that anytime we deal any type of damage, we are granted grenade energy, which is insanely useful and overpowered fragment, and is why I love the Strand subclass so much. I know the ability spam meta is not the meta we all want, but trust me, this build is fun to use every once in a while. Strand is honestly one of the most overpowered subclasses, and with this build, you will maximize its potential, and it's super fun. But yeah, that's all for our third hunter build. Next up for number 4, we have one of the most fun and toxic builds I've ever used. Trust me, it makes a lot of people mad, which is perfect. With this build, you will be able to constantly freeze enemies, which as we all know, means free kills. And since stasis is all about freezing enemies, I decided to incorporate the perfect exotic weapon into this build. The weapon is known as the Crucible, and if you haven't tried this weapon out, you need to give it a shot. With the Crucible, every time we get a kill with the weapon, you can charge up a shot that freezes any enemy upon impact, leading to a guaranteed kill. The way you want to go about this build is by using your cold snap grenades to track and freeze enemies so that we can start to freeze all of the enemies around us one by one. Then for the exotic, I of course like to use massive backers for the shift ability due to how insane it makes our movement and also grants us some bonus damage. So overall, a great exotic combo to use for this build. Now diving into the aspects that make this build work, first up we have Grim Harvest. Whenever we defeat a slowed or frozen combatant, we create a stasis shard that when collected grants us melee energy. Then we match it up with Touch of Winter, which makes it so that our cold snap grenade chains an additional time upon detonation, meaning we can freeze multiple people with one cold snap grenade, which is huge. Then for our fragments, the first one is called the Whisper of Hedrons, which greatly increases basically every single one of our character stats whenever we freeze a target with stasis, which is insanely beneficial for this build because we can freeze targets with our cold snap grenades and our Cryosthesia, meaning we will have a constant stat increase in our PvP fights. Then for our second fragment, we have Whisper of Refraction, which grants us class ability energy anytime we defeat a slowed or frozen target. And then for the third one, we have Whisper of Conduction, which makes it so that our stasis shards will track to your position so that you don't have to worry about running to them. It's really just a little quality of life fragment. And then we have a super great fragment known as the Whisper of Chains, which makes it so that whenever we are near a stasis crystal or a frozen target, we also take reduced damage from targets. So with that being said, the ideal combo for this build would be Cryosthesia plus a very good shotgun so that you can be up close and personal to make the most out of the freezes. And then last but not least, we have the Whisper of Rhyme fragment, which makes it so that anytime we collect a stasis shard, we will be granted a small overshield that can be increased and refreshed with an additional collected shard. So as we can see, we have a lot of fragments that work together very well with Cryosthesia and make this build a blast to use in any Crucible game mode. Definitely give this build a try if you want to make some people mad and be very successful in a lot of fights. For the last build of the video, all we have left is the Arc subclass, so that means I'm bringing out my insane Jolt Hunter build for y'all to see. Once again, with this build, you'll be able to succeed greatly in close quarters battles due to how often we are able to jolt everyone around us. If you're not too familiar with why jolting is good, it is helpful because it causes extra damage to enemies and also will chain damage to other enemies who are close enough to them. But starting with the aspects, we have one of my favorites known as Tempest Strike. Whenever you activate your charged melee, you will throw a huge beam of lightning towards your enemies, causing a lot of damage and also jolting them. Then the other aspect we have can be either flow state or lethal current, but I would say to definitely use flow state so you're able to become amplified anytime you kill a jolted target, because we're going to be jolting a lot of people, meaning this will be happening very often. Moving on to the abilities, I like to use Skip Grenade matched up with Disorienting Blow for the melee ability. Disorienting Blow is great because anytime we use our charged melee on an enemy, it will blind them while also amplifying us in the process, which is what we want. Being amplified in PvP just makes your pushing capabilities so much better and is why I enjoy the Arc subclass so much due to how fast you can be. And then when it comes to your class ability, you definitely want to earn Gambler's Dodge so that whenever you dodge near an enemy, your melee ability is fully recharged and you can make a disorienting blow work again, as well as your Tempest Strike. Now moving on to my fragments, the first one we are using is Spark of Haste for increased stats while sprinting. Then we have Spark of Shock to make our grenades jolt targets. And then for the third fragment, we are using Spark of Instinct, so whenever we are critically wounded in a fight, any nearby targets will become damaged and jolted. And then for the last one, we have Spark of Ions to make it so whenever we defeat one of the targets we jolt, an ionic trace will spawn in, which means we will be getting a lot of our ability energy back constantly throughout every one of our Crucible matches. This is probably one of my most used builds just because I love the Arc subclass in this game, so I highly recommend giving this one a try. It is very simple to use and very effective. But yeah guys, I really hope you enjoyed my top 5 PvP Hunter builds for each subclass and decide to try out one of them or maybe more of them out yourselves. Feel free to let me know if you want more videos like this, and until next time, my name is Apoxy. Peace.